largely untold story begins with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. New opportunities arise from this world historical catastrophe that destroyed Pompeii. Volcanic risk management, fertile earth and architectural innovations benefit future generations. The Bay of Naples, a place of longing for many. Life is good in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. The climate is gentle, the soil is fertile, and the food is tasty. Already in antiquity, the mild climate lured first Greek colonists to the area, and later also the glitterati from Rome. The rich and the super rich have their beach villas built here, and on the side make money from the wealth of agricultural products. But the Romans are unaware that they have built their homes on a powder keg. It comes as a shock when the eruption of Vesuvius destroys Pompeii and Herculaneum. Accilia D'Ambrosio, an archaeologist, sets out to explore for us the question of what happened after the catastrophe. The history of this deadly eruption has been explored. Eyewitness reports are available. Less is known, however, about the later fate of this region. Overlooked by Mount Vesuvius, the Bay of Naples is characterized by incredibly rich volcanic soil. And yet, the volcano is also the greatest enemy of the people who live here. For some 2,000 years, the volcano had lain dormant. Nothing had happened within the living memory of anyone. So the sudden eruption in 79 AD was probably all the more dramatic for the local population of the bay. Within hours, Vesuvius had turned a lush and flourishing landscape into a barren moonscape. Pompeii was completely buried under its ash. It is this sudden death that lies behind Pompeii's eternal fascination.
Why is Pompeii still so present in our collective memory? How did Pompeii become the focus of such fascination? And why do millions of people visit the city even today, so many years after its destruction and rediscovery?
Could it have to do with the fact that this city offers a snapshot of the past?
You could explain it using a comparison. Pompeii is a bit like the heroes of antiquity. As the saying goes, those whom the gods love die young. And such is the fate of Pompeii. It became immortal because it disappeared so quickly.
Improvvisa e catastrofica l'abbia resa immortale.
The eruption in 79 AD lasted for several hours. Pliny the Younger's written accounts describe the fear and helplessness of the residents in vivid words. The eruption began between 10 and 11 a.m. with a mighty explosion that ruptured the crater floor and laid bare the volcano's magma conduit. The volcano hurled rocks into the air. Later, clouds of gas suffocated many residents of Pompeii, Herculaneum, and the entire region. Buildings were buried. The livelihood of the people was destroyed. Massimo Osanna is the excavation site's director. Accilia meets him on the Forum, the main square of ancient Pompeii, to find out how Romans reacted to the catastrophe.
This spot was completely buried during the eruption of 79 AD, just like the rest of the city. What measures did the Imperial administration take? And especially, what did Titus, in whose reign this happened, do right after the catastrophe took place?
Poor Titus had to deal with this catastrophe just months after he assumed power. It was an acid test of sorts, and I must say he mastered it very well. He appointed a commission, Restituende Campaniae, which immediately set out to get a picture of the situation on site. The commission returned with the bad news that Pompeii and Herculaneum had been completely buried and couldn't be rebuilt. But the measure that the Commission undertakes probably relates to the public spaces, especially this forum. During excavations in the 19th century, it was found all but completely plundered. There was no marble left that adorned the buildings, no bronze statues. All that remained were foundations, plinths without their marble panels and without their statues. It's obvious that the Commission got involved here because this was a public space. They salvaged what could be salvaged and removed what they could. The bronzes to melt them down, the marble to repurpose it. Public property was thus recycled.
Titus had only succeeded his father Vespasian in June 79. The new emperor proves to be an outstanding crisis manager, which came as a surprise to his contemporaries.
Before he became emperor, he wasn't terribly popular. So he was known for his cruelty, his capriciousness. He was a bit of a charlatan, a bit of a lad. And one thing that people thought when they talked about Titus was he had an affair with a Jewish princess called Berenice. And that made him look a little bit like the sort of Antony and Cleopatra coupling. So I think there were some associations that worried people a bit, that troubled people. But then his activity as soon as he became emperor in helping people recover both from the eruption in this area and from a big fire in Rome actually propelled his reputation into a much better state.
Titus quickly implements a relief program and has the roads rebuilt. People who are cut off from the outside world can thus be supplied with whatever they need to survive. During the eruption, a wave of mud buried the streets. The floor level was raised and the coastline was shifted by 2 kilometers. Infrastructure reconstruction is Titus's top priority. Just how elaborate this work is can be seen when replicating a Roman road. All around Mount Vesuvius, the emperor's curators try to dig out the old roads or build new ones. According to accounts by Sueton, the Roman historian, Titus not only proved to be an effective statesman, but also supported his subjects like a loving father. He had very close ties to the Vesuvius region. The Imperial family owned country estates here, in which they spent the summer months. To personally comfort the survivors and keep up to date the progress of implemented measures, Titus visited the area just months after the eruption. He even made available own assets to ensure quick relief. His was the biggest private donation ever made during the Roman Empire's long history. The Roman state provides both manpower and logistics, and its army functions like a well-oiled machine, even outside of wartime contexts.
They were superbly organized. They don't start at one point and end at another. There were countless construction sites. At each one, a small part was reconstructed, and in the end it all came together. This accelerated the work. The Romans thus were able to build a major road in a short space of time, in months, or perhaps a few years.
It wasn't until Emperor Hadrian's reign, some 50 years later, that road networks and the most important infrastructures were fully restored. In the wake of the eruption, the region becomes a lawless zone. The imperial administration endeavors to counteract this quickly. Especially ownership status needs to be clarified. It's important for residents to know where their property ends and their neighbours begins.
All those boundaries had gone, right? Because you know, in Pompeii, you have sort of 6 meters of ash and lapilli. In Herculaneum, 20 meters of mud and volcanic debris. You don't know which bit of land is owned by who anymore. So one thing that Titus and his envoys did was they started to reallocate bits of land, and as soon as people know which bit of land is theirs, you can start rebuilding, you can start farming, start using the soil again.
Reallocation of the land is the indispensable condition of an economic revival. In Naples' Archaeological National Museum, Acilia D'Ambrosio meets Ferdinando di Simone, from whom she hopes to learn more about the economy of this ancient region and understand what conditions were necessary for its rebuilding. They meet in front of the famous Bacchus fresco from the Casa del Centenario. It establishes a direct link between Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, and Mount Vesuvius.
Wine production was Pompeii's main business. And just as it is today, back then it too was difficult to predict the quality of the vintage and difficult to control nature. Up until a few decades ago, patron saints were invoked. In antiquity, one relied on deities.
So wine was the economic motor, just like agriculture in general. And from Pompeii, it was exported throughout the entire empire?
Yes, all through the empire. And indeed, if we think about the Vesuvius eruption in the 1st century after Christ, we already have a very advanced Roman economy throughout Campania. For the whole area surrounding the volcano, it was easy to import cereals and oil from other regions while staying focused on wine production. Keep in mind, and the sources describe this, that 2/3 of Vesuvius was covered by vineyards. Indeed, wine from Campania was very well known and easily traded anywhere.
The amphoras that were found help archaeologists track how wine from the foot of Mount Vesuvius was shipped to Greece, Gaul, Spain, Britain, Northern Africa, and even to India. That Titus invested so much money and manpower in the region's reconstruction is mainly down to the excellent wine that was produced here. Pliny the Elder waxed lyrical about the happy land whose liquid product is famous everywhere and makes everyone merry.
All self-respecting Romans drank wine. The elite and the poor alike would drink wine. Wine was produced all across Italy and indeed across the empire. It is a big focus of the sort of the dinner time experience of sitting down, drinking wine, having conversation, telling stories. You know, wine and the things that you drink wine out of and the stories that you tell about wine are fundamental to Roman social life. Romans would typically produce what we think of as fortified wine. So, you know, very strong wine. It's a bit like port, maybe. And they'd water it down. So if you're a sensible Roman, you'd water your wine down.
Based on estimates, there were 80 to 95 wine bars in ancient Pompeii. With a population of just 10 to 12,000 people, that comes out to 1 bar per 125 residents. Taverns in ancient times were also fast food restaurants. Containers with food were embedded in the counter so that customers who were in a hurry could be served their meal quickly. The importance of the wine business is also reflected in the Villa of the Mysteries, located outside of the city walls. Built in the 1st century BC, it is one of Pompeii's biggest villa complexes and encompasses some 90 rooms. Richly adorned with frescoes, it mirrors the wealth of its owners, Romans who owned an army of slaves to run the villa. This is where Ercilia meets up with the German archaeologist Pia Kastenmeier, who had dedicated her entire life as a researcher to Pompeii and the region surrounding Mount Vesuvius. The large wall fresco in the Triclinicum shows mythological scenes. In this dining room, the wealthy Roman elite hosted extravagant parties, and that, of course, goes hand in hand with good wine, which was produced just a few rooms down in the Villa of the Mysteries.
Especially here in the Vesuvius region and the entire hinterland of Pompeii, practically all of the villas or country estates were part production site and part resident, with rooms for the owners that were beautiful and luxurious. Slaves, staff and peasants, also those who lived on their own, worked in the wine-producing part of the estate. The lavishly adorned villa section is particularly beautiful here in the Villa of the Mysteries.
The artistic frescoes are the pride and joy of the wealthy owners. Colourful frescoes were considered a status symbol. White walls, on the other hand, were seen as a sign of poverty in ancient Roman times. But the frescoes also convey messages and tell stories. The adventures of the great heroes of antiquity are often depicted, for example, or scenes from the lives of the deities. In the past, mythological motifs used to entertain people in the way that comics or illustrated books entertain us today.
The frescoes in the Villa of the Mysteries also point to the importance of the cult of Dionysus and wine production.
Here in the middle of this picture, we do in fact see Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. Obviously, he was one of the most important deities in the Vesuvian region. And even in the smaller Villae Rusticae, which are not that luxurious, you often find frescoes depicting Dionysus. And they are usually found exactly in those rooms where the transformation from grapes to grape must took place. So their purpose was to watch over the winemaking process.
The Villa of the Mysteries living quarters with the famous Dionysus fresco are west-facing, toward the ocean. The kitchen and utility rooms face south or east, while the sections inhabited by slaves, along with the packing sheds for the agricultural products, are north-facing. A large wine press was found in the villa's production area by archaeologists in the 20th century. The wood vats were filled with grapes that were crushed between wooden beams by winding down a windlass. The juice flowed first into the large basin and from there, via channels, into the large characteristic terracotta vessels, the so-called doglia. They were embedded in the ground to prevent temperature fluctuations, thus giving the wine ideal conditions to mature.
The wine business in the Vesuvian region was already experiencing upheaval. There was a lot of competition, especially from Gaul and Spain, where good quality wine was being produced at lower prices. The eruption in 79 AD completely destroyed this economic system. The town's destruction was akin to the destruction of the brain that coordinates production and sales.
Wine growing generally took place outside of city walls, but some wines were found within the city, for example, near the amphitheatre. The soil was very fertile due to its volcanic origin and proximity to the Sarno River, which irrigates the plain of Pompeii. Evidence of the ancient roots can still be established in the soil today. Romans, however, drank wine that was altogether different from today's. What tasted good to the Roman palate was fundamentally different from what we like to eat.
Romans not only appreciated the different grape varieties, but also produced wines to suit various occasions. There were light wines, bold wines, young wines, and those that could be aged for up to 15 years. And even some cheap wines for slaves that were produced from various grape varieties soaked in water. They provided calories and fortified them, but didn't taste like wine. In this case, we produced mulsum. Mulsum is an aperitif wine made of must and honey. 4 parts of must to 1 part of honey. In a sealed container, it's allowed to ferment for 1 month. After that, it can be drunk. Let's see how it turned out.
Well, it is in fact very sweet. It tastes unusual and very sweet, perhaps too sweet for our palate.
The alcohol also comes through. I can understand why the Romans liked it.
Absolutely. It's somehow delicious.
We could serve it.
To go with an appetizer.
It wasn't just wine that was grown in this region. Other agricultural products that brought wealth to the area, both before and after the catastrophe, included fruit, cereals and olive oil. Finds from the Pompeian excavations show that the volcano not only destroyed life, but at the same time also gave life by making the soil so fertile. These organic finds are collected in a laboratory of applied studies in Pompeii. This is where Ersilia meets Antonio Stampone.
What's special about these finds is that they tell a story about what daily life was like 2,000 years ago. We marvel at the ancient city, the frescoes in the houses, but it's also interesting to see what the people actually produced, what they ate. And this hasn't changed compared to today.
Exactly. Real insights into daily life.
2,000 years ago, we have figs. And we have dates, which were, of course, imported.
They weren't produced locally.
This helps us to understand the trade relationships with other countries.
Sure, but also the city's wealth.
Yes, we have almonds, wheat, spelt, horse beans, and plums.
So there was wealth just like there is today. Nothing has changed. The Sarno River plain is very fertile.
And this is another fruit that is typical for the region, a pomegranate. And here we have the famous garum, the fish sauce that Romans were so crazy about. It was made exclusively from fatty Mediterranean fishes, anchovies, mackerel, and sardines. They're sun-dried and eventually turn into pulp. Romans were used to bold flavors that were used to cover up other tastes because they didn't have food conservation methods, other than preserving it in salt or honey.
That food goes off cannot be avoided.
And this, shall we say, is a more evolved garum, the famous anchovy seasoning sauce from Cetara. It also has a very strong taste from the liquid that anchovies secrete when they're cured in salt. It's also a culinary highlight of Campania, and it's still popular today.
The smell is rather extreme, but we know that it's a delicacy of Campanian cuisine. Actually, it's treasured across the globe, even though the smell is, well,
a bit extreme.
It's a bit extreme.
The typical organic finds that are being analysed in this lab have also raised an important question. Is the eruption date that we have been working with for hundreds of years, in fact, correct? In a letter, Pliny writes, "The catastrophe took place on the 24th of August, but why have excavators found chestnuts, pomegranates, and other autumn fruits?" During the most recent excavations in Pompeii, archaeologists made a spectacular find that could answer this question once and for all. In 2018, a house that had just been renovated when disaster struck was laid bare. The inscription had likely been added to it just days before the catastrophe.
It brought to light something quite extraordinary. This inscription was probably added by a slave or family member who lived in this house. It was meant as a reminder or memo and reveals something remarkable, namely a date, 60K Nov. In other words, 16 days before the calends of November. It continues, in Oliaria Proma Sumserunt, and then breaks off. So something was either removed from or taken to the warehouse. We'll never know what. But what interests us is when, because this happened on the 17th of October. In other words, many, many weeks after the 24th of August, the eruption date that we use.
During the eruption, ash and rocks rained down to the south in the direction of the ocean. They buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, and the rock masses shifted the coastline. People and nature north of the volcano, on the other hand, were largely spared. Here a new beginning could very quickly be initiated. Some years ago, archaeologists stumbled upon an ancient villa here. It quickly became evident that they were dealing with a huge estate, and there was wild speculation as to who the owners were. Acilia meets excavation director Antonio Di Simone in this villa located in Somma Vesuviana.
Si è ritenuto che questo potesse essere il luogo.
It was speculated that this might be the villa of the Octavians, in which Emperor Augustus died. When we started our excavations, there was nothing to see here, just a meadow. Then we discovered what we see here today, and found out that the villa most likely doesn't have anything to do with Augustus's villa. But it divulges information on how this region functioned, and especially about how Campania functioned after the Vesuvius eruption in 79 AD and up to the beginning of the Middle Ages.
The circumstance that this isn't Augustus's villa is not at all detrimental to our research.
Well, we would have been delighted to find Augustus's villa. What we see here, however, is a building from the middle of the 2nd century AD. The situation in the Roman Empire had gradually changed by then. It had entered a state of crisis, and then with the death of Romulus Augustus, finally collapsed. It was during this last phase that the villa was restructured. It was transformed from a holiday villa to more and more of a production facility for wine.
In the 2nd century AD, wine was produced in Somma Vesuviana on an industrial scale. This villa proves, a few centuries after the catastrophe, that the economy and the soil in the vicinity of Mount Vesuvius had recovered. The archaeological finds suggest that 100,000 litres of wine flowed from the press annually. It was delivered to the embedded dolia for maturation via a sophisticated system of channels. Dionysus watches over the wine production in Somma Vesuviana as well. Statues and frescoes attest to the fact that this region's economic wealth also continued to be used in support of the arts.
Obviously, thus far, only part of the building, which was surely much larger, has been unearthed.
The building could have had up to 20,000 square meters of floor space. The size is not surprising, either for villas prior to or after the eruption. So far, we have uncovered 2,500 square meters.
So barely 1/10 of the total presumed size. Imperial intervention is another explanation for the size and success of this wine estate. To help the struggling wine-growing business in Campania, Emperor Domitian issued a decree that made life more difficult for wine producers from Gaul and Spain. The winery in Somma Vesuviana is just one example. Researchers believe that there are other villas in this area that were built as wine production facilities. And writers from ancient times also mention the economic recovery in the region.
Cassius Dio is a historian writing about 120 years after the eruption in the late 2nd century AD, early 3rd century AD. He tells the story of the eruption, and he says that in his day, 120 years later, you can see plants growing on the slopes of Vesuvius, you can see vineyards being cultivated. So by that time, the region is experiencing a resurgence in productivity.
Paradoxically, Mount Vesuvius itself plays a part in this economic upswing. The 79 AD eruption actually made the soil even more fertile. Over the long run, thus, the devastating eruption went hand in hand with even higher wine yields in the region. Our image of the eruption is, however, informed by cliches and myths.
Popular imagination has lava flowing down from the mountain and consuming everything and everybody, and it was not like that. Okay, so Pompeii was buried under 6 meters of ash, which accumulated over a day or two. Herculaneum was first incinerated by a pyroclastic flow, and then a big landslide where mud and volcanic debris covered the town.
To understand what actually happened and how dangerous the volcano was and is, Acilia meets with volcanologist Mauro De Vito on top of the volcano.
Questo vulcano alterna fasi brevi con tante.
This volcano alternates between short bursts of, in part very violent activity, and long periods of dormancy, in which it still experiences geological activity. The risk that it poses is down to its very intense eruptions on the one hand, but also the circumstance that the area has been very densely populated for millennia. And events like the Pompeii eruption have occurred multiple times.
Storie tipo quella di Pompeii.
As for the devastating eruption of 79 AD, what order of magnitude are we talking about in terms of this eruption's danger and destruction?
Sì. Allora, mi fa piacere in questa.
To answer this, I'd like to quote from a letter written by Pliny the Younger, who chronicled the eruption from a distance of 40 kilometers at Capo Miseno. He describes a huge cloud above the volcano, a so-called Plian column, that rose 30 kilometers high. This expanding cloud is driven by wind. Pumice and ash rains down from it and blankets an area thousands of square kilometers wide, to devastating effect.
Ma la parte più pericolosa è quella che avviene durante l'innalzamento della colonna.
But the most dangerous part is when the cloud rises. An unstable cloud can collapse into itself and cause pyroclastic streams. These are composed of parts of this cloud, gases, and glowing hot particles that hurtle down the volcano's slopes with the speed of a hurricane. So you have high speed, high temperatures, high energy. We call this dynamic pressure.
quasi impossibile.
And it's all but impossible to survive
La parte
that.
più pericolosa di queste eruzioni.
It's the most dangerous part of these eruptions, coupled with the ruptures that occur after the volcano has emptied its magma chamber.
Lo svuotamento del
Water can seep into the system through these ruptures. And this water doesn't cool the magma. Instead, it increases its explosiveness.
L'acqua non raffredda il magma, ma ne aumenta l'esplosività.
If no evacuation plan is in place, there's virtually no escaping an eruption like the one that occurred in 79 AD, and the Romans obviously didn't have one.
Noi sappiamo, ovviamente, I romani non potevano concepire, non avevano concepito.
Ma non solo I romani.
It wasn't just the Romans who didn't have one. There was no evacuation plan in 1631 either, when an eruption killed at least 5,000 people. This might have been the point at which it was decided to monitor the volcano.
Questo vulcano.
The world's oldest volcanological institute is founded in 1841 on Mount Vesuvius. The Neapolitan King Ferdinand II wants his subjects to have the protection that ancient residents of the region weren't afforded. He encourages and promotes the sciences and the building of instruments that can predict an impending eruption of a seemingly inactive volcano. A catastrophe like the one in 79 AD, which cost the lives of so many and necessitated a tremendous reconstruction effort, shall never be repeated. Mechanical instruments that measure Earth movement laid the cornerstone for modern seismography. Monitoring technology, however, does not provide complete security. A fundamental problem in this region is the circumstance that it has been densely settled since the Bronze Age. The volcano draws people into its orbit because it bestows a livelihood and riches upon them. Yet this proximity is also dangerous. Mount Vesuvius is not the only element of uncertainty in this region. The island of Ischia also has a volcano, and almost half of Naples was built into the crater of a supervolcano, the Phlegrean Fields. A modern observatory that monitors the activities of all the volcanoes in the Bay of Naples is located in the middle of this crater. Displayed on dozens of screens, volcanologists and geologists can see Earth movements and temperature curves that provide information on volcanic activities. Nowadays, an eruption can be predicted about 1 month in advance. The people in Pompeii should have been alerted by the many earthquakes that shook the region since 62 AD. But since they didn't know that these were likely triggered by Vesuvius, that they were announcing the catastrophe, the eruption took them by surprise.
Some people must have managed to escape in directions that were safe. A lot of people went to the shore in the hope that they'd be rescued by ships, and I think some were. Many weren't. A lot of people lost their lives. A lot of people suffocated with all the ash that was falling down. Pliny the Younger, who writes about the eruption, tells us about his uncle Pliny the Elder, who was commanding a fleet that had been sent down, presumably by the Emperor Titus, to perform a rescue operation. Pliny's activity in this area is another bit of evidence of Titus intervening quickly.
The landscape along the Bay of Naples is marked by its volcanic origin. Lakes that fill what used to be craters, hills that are actually crater rims. Thus, it's not surprising that people in antiquity believed the entrance to the underworld was located here. They imagined that giants dwelled in the craters and that sulfur-containing fumes sent the oracle priests into prophetic trances. The Romans sensed that the Bay of Naples was a dangerous place to live. The landscape also changes over the course of time. Today, Vesuvius has 2 peaks. Prior to the eruption in 79 AD, there was just one. Precious items that were buried under Vesuvius ash and rock are kept at the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. Among them is a real treasure from the house of Menander in Pompeii. A 115-piece silver service with a total weight of 24 kilograms. The goblets, plates and bowls are elaborately adorned with animal heads and olive leaves, as well as mythological scenes from the life of Hercules and Dionysus. Wealthy Roman patricians with excellent connections to the Imperial dynasty owned the house. Quintus Poppaeus was related to Nero's second wife. Excavators found the silver treasure in the basement of the house in 1930. Presumably, the rich owners hid it there for safekeeping, since they lived predominantly in the capital. A chest of gold and silver coins, along with a jewelry box, was also found in the basement. Another find, however, is even more interesting in terms of the insight it gives on what life was like there after the catastrophe.
Sono stati trovati gli scheletri di alcune persone.
Some of the bodies were found here. Interestingly, tools such as spades and a lantern, perfect to commit a break-in, were found next to them. We can assume that immediately after the eruption, they returned to burgle a home.
Per rubare e spogliare le case.
Apparently, the robbers' instincts were correct, as the house of Menander was one of the grandest in Pompeii. It encompassed 1,830 square meters and was richly decorated with artistic frescoes and elaborate mosaics. It was already built in the 3rd century BC under Greek rule, even before the Romans had gained a foothold here. The thieves were familiar with the area and knew where a break-in would prove worthwhile. They were very well organized.
Graffiti was found on the wall of one of the houses. The graffiti reads, "This house has already been robbed."
After the eruption buried them, theft and looting in the houses on the Vesuvian plain became more widespread. Looters took what they could from villas and towns that had been abandoned by the civil authorities. The grand homes of Pompeii were their main target. The house of Menander, for example, took up an entire block. It was obvious that their efforts would be rewarded here. Thieves weren't just after gold and silver. They also kept an eye open for valuable statues, frescoes, and marble pillars.
The wealth of Pompeii, the lavish decor and furnishings, has always been enticing to grave robbers. In antiquity and today alike, illegal excavations are in fact still a major problem that authorities are constantly grappling with.
Sono una piaga contro la quale le autorità devono continuamente combattere.
The authorities have set up a special unit to combat these illicit excavations, of which there are particularly many in the Vesuvius region. The archaeological dig in Pompeii is well guarded. The surrounding area, however, is too extensive to keep a watchful eye on. This is where grave robbers see their opportunity. Carabinieri stumbled upon an illegal excavation of enormous dimensions in Civita Giuliana. Archaeologists had already unearthed remnants from antiquity here at the beginning of the 20th century, but then quickly abandoned the dig. In 1994, the results of the excavation were published. Perhaps this is what made tomb raiders aware of the site?
As an investigative authority, we're aware that grave robbers have been active in this area for years. We notified the Antiquities Authority of this and requested that an emergency excavation be carried out. These excavations have not only brought to light significant scientific, historical, cultural, and archaeological insights, but have also aided the investigation by finding evidence that identifies the culprits.
Investigators don't know what the tomb raiders took in Civita Giuliana. The colourful fractured edges suggest that the walls have been graced with frescoes. It stands to reason that the villa was also furnished. Things that can't be turned into money are often just destroyed through amateurish excavation methods. To prevent the worst, investigators call in the support of professional archaeologists. They find the family altar from the time of the volcanic eruption, as well as a grave from the following century.
Obviously, they don't use the door. They drill holes through walls to get from one room to the next. And in the process, they destroy archaeological artifacts. Fortunately, a tunnel they dug only crossed the stable on one side. The horses thus remained intact. These were stud horses that were likely used for parades, military activities, and representative purposes. What is unique about them is that they were fully harnessed at the time of the eruption.
Were these horses to be used to flee, to help the owners salvage their belongings in a wagon? All we know is that fleeing offered the only chance of surviving this cataclysmic volcanic eruption.
Obviously, efforts were made to save as many people as possible, and they were probably taken to Naples, where there was a quarter called Ercolanese. This suggests that they were settled there. Inscriptions also reveal that further survivors were relocated to other provinces in Italy.
After the catastrophe of 79 AD, the region needed decades to recover. It is thanks to Titus's determined and resolute intervention that the crisis was overcome and life could begin anew. As cities, Pompeii and Herculaneum were lost forever. But they live on, not only as tourist hotspots and laboratories for classical archaeologists. Gabriella Cianciolo, an architectural historian, has dedicated her research to Pompeii's afterlife in our modern cities. Acilia is interested in hearing from her where we encounter Pompeii in our daily life today.
Pompeii is everywhere, not just here in Naples because we're close to Pompeii, but in all of Europe. We encounter it in various forms, from porcelain all the way to urban planning. This, for example, is a building that we would never associate with Pompeii. The cast iron architecture is something we associate with the modern age, rather than with Pompeii. Yet Pompeii also lies concealed within these forms. In what respect? The architects of the 19th century, who now had new materials such as iron and cast iron at their disposal, found a wonderful model in Pompeian frescoes. These fine, airy and filigree forms are reminiscent of Pompeian paintings.
Pompeian frescoes were read like architectural drawings by 19th century architects. Since there were as yet no models for the new materials they had at their disposal, they let themselves be inspired by Pompeian paintings. They transformed into real architecture what was conceived in ancient times as a figment of the imagination. Buildings made of iron help shape many modern cityscapes across the globe.
19th century buildings such as libraries, markets, like these here, a type of concert pavilion, became a successful model of architecture in France, Denmark, England and Italy.
Thus,
centuries after the end of Pompeii, the fantastic architecture depicted in its frescoes, which found no practical implementation in ancient times and was only considered as decoration, became reality.
Gottfried Semper says the murals of Pompeii show that Romans built with iron and wood. In his opinion, these mural paintings were in fact real architectural models.
Pompeii lives on in the cities of today, but especially in the popular imagination. The archaeological site captures our imagination. It has become the incarnation of Roman antiquity. All the while, Pompeii also tells a story of extreme modernity. Following the devastating calamity, Titus took action like a modern-day crisis manager. Within no time at all, he coordinated a relief effort that made it possible to reconstruct the livelihoods of the survivors and set the stage for the region's economic comeback. With this, the Roman Emperor created the basis for what continues to be a prospering region today.